Before we start with today's episode, I did want to talk about a few things. If you've noticed, if you listen to the podcast and you're a dedicated podcast listener, you noticed that we only put out one episode last week. So that's what we're going to be doing moving forward. Ashley and I decided that that's going to be best for the podcast. I don't know if you guys realize there is a lot that goes into running a podcast. And we in the past have been consistently putting out 2 episodes. And it just became, not that it was too much work, but we just felt like we were just concentrating on too many episodes. Like I would like to do a little bit more with the podcast, especially because we do have the YouTube channel. Like I want to focus on not just putting out podcast episodes, but also putting out like tutorials and just putting a little bit more effort into the Facebook group. Because I know that's been something that's been brought up with some of our listeners is when we talk about some of these things, they want a visual. You know, it's hard to like just kind of listen to things on the podcast, but I think it'll be really beneficial if we start putting out a little bit more on the YouTube channel with some stuff like some walkthroughs of, you know, when you're dealing with like today's episode, how do you deal with an unpaid item on eBay? How do you cancel it? So doing some of those tutorials, I think that'll be really beneficial. Another thing, we hit 75,000 downloads for the podcast, which is amazing. We cannot thank you guys enough. Every single one of you who listens and tunes in wherever you listen to the podcast or if you're watching on YouTube, we sincerely thank you guys for listening. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, back to the first point, I think that this is going to give us a really good opportunity to dive a little deeper into the topics that we're covering as well. If we're, putting out one episode a week, then we can go like deeper into that topic, which I think will be helpful. There's, we don't want to make the episodes incredibly long. I feel like most of you guys probably listen while you're driving or doing another task or, maybe at your 9-to-5 job when you have some time you're doing a task that you can kind of multitask that task with something else. So we don't want to make them insanely long, but we could do more like 2-part episodes where we dive deeper into a topic and cover it more extensively, which I think will be helpful if you've been, following along for a while. If you've started at the beginning, you're probably at a point right now where you don't feel like a beginner anymore. You're like, I have some experience. I've sold some things on these platforms. I've got my feet in the door. I kind of have a sense of what I'm doing. So if we could dive deeper into some of these topics, I think that would be really beneficial for you guys too.
I completely agree. And I think that's a good direction for the podcast and also, like you said, for the listeners. And then last week, the episode I did, which was a solo episode, I talked about should you attend reseller events, which I thought was a really good topic because there's been so many different events that have been going on. But one of them that I did not bring up was the eBay Open. So I wanted to talk about that for just a little bit. So that, if you're unfamiliar, the eBay Open is something that they put out every single year. This year, it's going to be September 26th through the 29th. And there's going to be in-person events. So there's 4 cities where they're going to host the in-person events. Atlanta, Philadelphia, Chicago, and Phoenix. So I actually signed up to be one of them to go to the in-person Phoenix event. And I am really excited to go this year. Casey's going to be going as well. There's going to be different speakers, different topics. And I think it's going to really help me personally because there's just so much to learn about eBay. But I'm excited to then bring it back to the podcast and, explain exactly what I learned or, aha moments or things that I didn't know about eBay. And so some of the topics are going to be like creating a listing, using their tools. So they'll talk more in depth about using the coupons and running sales, international shipping, which is something I'm very unfamiliar with. So I'm excited for that topic and to learn more, sourcing inventory, using social media. So there's just going to be all sorts of topics. There's also virtual events. So if you can't attend one of the in-person events in these cities, you can actually sign up and I believe just participate whenever speakers go live. I'm not 100% sure how it works, but I would guess that's what happens. Like you'll get access to all the speakers and all of them throughout the country, the 4 cities that they're going to be hosting the live events in. So I think that's going to be really cool. It is free virtually, I believe, but the in-person events, we had to pay $25. but they're going to give a $25 eBay gift card and then a swag bag. So you get a bunch of stuff when you go. So essentially, it's free, but you had to pay the $25. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll leave a link down below that you guys can check out and sign up. And if you're listening, I highly recommend you participate in this because it is free and you're just going to learn things to help grow your business. Now, back to today's episode. So the topic, which I feel like is just one of the biggest topics out there for eBay sellers, is how to deal with unpaid items on eBay. So I think that's one of the biggest frustrations right now that sellers do have is we don't like to sell something and then have the sale fall through. And eBay is really pretty much one of the only platforms where as a buyer, you can buy an item and pay later. Kind of like the concept of layaway. It always makes me think of when I worked in retail and I worked at the Rave at Cherryvale Mall in Cherry Valley, Illinois. And I'd have a bunch of people come in. They'd want to put all their clothes on layaway and the stuff would sit in the back and sit there for weeks. And we'd call them and tell them, your stuff is due. They had like 30 days to pay. And it would just sit there. And then if they didn't pay, and sometimes people would come in and pay, but there was probably a 70% chance that they were never going to come back. They just like to shop and then put it aside. And so then, we had to be responsible for putting that merchandise back on the floor. So that was, something that our store offered, but that's something with eBay. That's kind of what they're allowing buyers to do is put stuff on layaway. So I think as a seller, it is very, very frustrating when that does happen.
I'm not really sure.
But I also feel like, go ahead.
I'm not really sure why eBay allows that, or like what started all of the whole, you can buy now and pay later. But like you said, it is the only platform that I'm aware of that you're allowed to do that. And obviously, there's been a lot of talk in the community about requiring immediate pay on eBay. And it's been one of the biggest requests that everyone has wanted. We've all requested it from eBay. Anytime that they ask for feedback, people were like, the one thing that we want is for you to require immediate payment from buyers. Like, please just do that for us. So, if you listen to like the eBay for Business Potty, they've said multiple times that it is in the works. So hopefully it is in the works. They've been talking about it. But hopefully it's sooner than later, because this is definitely the biggest headache I think that eBay sellers experience in selling on eBay.
Yeah. And I know we feel like as sellers, we feel like that is like a big frustration. But on the other hand, like in some cases, having this type of payment policy might be very attractive to some buyers. So maybe they are looking for a platform like this. Like maybe they don't have a specific payment and they have to like find another one and put it in. Or maybe they're trying to buy as a guest and, they bought the item and then they have to go and pay for it.
Yeah. So when you buy as a guest, like I think you have the option to use your PayPal, like right there. Like that's like one of the main payment methods. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't understand. I just don't. Like if you go to buy anything anywhere on any website, like you have to have a payment method ready, whether it's like, you're using Klarna or Afterpay or PayPal or just like your, a credit card or debit card. Like, when you go to buy something online, like if I press pay now or checkout or whatever, like I'm going to be giving up money for this item. And eBay is the only place on the internet where that's not the case. So I just feel like if they start to require it, like buyers will get with the program pretty quickly because they have on every other website in existence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I wonder if it's because of how they started off as like an auction site. Like, I wonder if that's one of the reasons, because if you bid on an item and you win it, it doesn't charge you right away. You have to go in and you have to pay for that item. Yeah. So maybe maybe that was why they kind of have that. I just feel like it would be such an easy fix. Like, I don't understand, like it just seems so simple, and maybe there's so much on the back end, or maybe they are afraid of, because they were built on the auction site and people being able to pay after they win an auction and maybe buyers give feedback. I don't know. Maybe they do send out like emails, give us feedback or what's your opinion or rate. Maybe buyers do like that they don't have to pay right away. And so maybe that's eBay's fear on the back end, is that they might lose some of their buyers because they would have to pay right away. But in the end, it's like you said, you don't go to the grocery store and say, I want you guys to put this in the freezer or the fridge, keep it cool for me, and I'm going to come back in a week and pay. Like, that just doesn't happen. So I just don't see why they don't change it. But it's something we have to deal with as sellers. It's their platform, and until they change it, like, you definitely have to, it's something you're going to have to deal with. There's no way to get out of having items that are not unpaid. So in the eBay help section, they do have a blurb for buyers, and it says, when you buy an item, it's important to pay as quickly as possible. If you haven't paid within 4 calendar days, a seller can cancel your order. If this happens, you won't receive your item, and the unpaid item will be recorded on your account. Buyers who have excessive unpaid items or canceled orders may have limits imposed or lose their buying privileges, which I feel like buyers probably don't go through the help section, but eBay is very aware that this is a common practice for some sellers. So at least they have that in place. Now, I don't know what that means. If you have 10 unpaid items, they restrict your account, or maybe they do make you pay. I don't know how that works, but that is in the help section. So eBay is aware that this is an issue for sellers. So hopefully soon they will change it. But today's episode, I wanted to kind of talk about how to deal with this when this does happen, because it did come up pretty much in our Facebook group, why sellers would think of this as a negative thing. So the first thing, taking 4 days prevents the item from being sold to another buyer. So if you have an unpaid item, that item technically, possibly could have been sold to somebody else, and it's just sitting there. And then if you see that it's unpaid after a couple days and you cancel it, it affects your metrics. You know, it's not your fault as a seller that the buyer isn't paying, but you cannot cancel that sale for 4 days, or it will hurt your account. You'll get dinged for that, especially if you choose something other than buyer asked to cancel. But if you do cancel and they don't ask you to cancel, then that affects your account. Another thing, it makes us as sellers do more on the back end. It's nice when you make a sale, and what do you do next? You know you have to ship that item out. So it makes us as sellers have to do more on the back end. You have to maybe send an invoice, send a message to the buyer reminding them to pay for the item. And then if it doesn't get paid, and let's say that you can cancel the sale after 4 days, then you have to relist the item. So it's making us as sellers kind of have to, almost in a sense, like babysit the buyer. Like, hello, like, you know, we're all adults, let's pay for the item. But you have to, as the seller, monitor that sale, make sure it's being paid. If it's not, then you have to cancel it and relist it. So it's just making us do more work as the seller. Another worry as a seller would be when these unpaid items, if you see that the buyer has no feedback. And this was something that I wanted to talk about because somebody in the Daycheckers Facebook group brought this up. Like, their worry was, I have an unpaid item. I see that they either have no feedback or they have positive feedback with people saying that they did not pay for the item. Because I don't know if you guys realize, when you go to rate a buyer, you can only choose positive or report buyer. You cannot leave them negative feedback. So if you are having to rate somebody who did not pay for an item, the only option is to choose positive, which is unfortunate. But I do like that those other sellers were putting that, you know, as the positive feedback, because that was kind of their only choice. But in my case, I would probably report the person and then just say they did not pay for the item, reached out to them multiple times. And then that way, at least eBay has some sort of record that this is something that the buyer is doing. But it also goes back to the episode that we did about eBay buyers with no feedback, and just how so many sellers just get so bent up about, you know, I don't want to sell to them because they don't have feedback. But we talked about that in that episode. Everybody starts with 0 feedback. You as a seller started with 0 feedback. So that just because it looks like they're not going to pay and they don't have 0 feedback doesn't mean that they're not going to eventually pay. And they might be using eBay as a guest. So if you're as a guest, you're going to show up with zero feedback. Maybe it's somebody who's using the platform for the first time. So when you see unpaid items, there are some tips that I want to share on how you can deal with that type of buyer.
All right. So the first tip that we have for you guys is to send an invoice along with a message, just letting the buyer know that the item is ready for payment, just in case they weren't aware of that. And then you can also let them know if they're not interested in the item anymore, just to let you know there's, no big deal. Just let me know and I can relist the item. No harm, no foul.
When we are sending an invoice, we usually wait probably a couple hours and maybe we'll send an invoice and just say, because you can write a message in the invoice when you send it to the buyer, and we'll say, your item is ready to ship. As soon as we receive payment, we will ship your item out. And then after that, we'll follow up with another message letting you know, just here's a friendly reminder, letting you know that your item is ready to ship. If you no longer need this item, please let us know. Because I feel like maybe some buyers are afraid to say that they don't need that item anymore, and they just kind of let it go and they don't respond. So I feel like by saying, if you don't need this item anymore, let us know, 9 times out of 10, they might respond and say, please cancel this sale. I no longer want the item. So it just kind of opens up a little bit of communication, and hopefully then the buyer will let you know and you can cancel the sale, relist it, and hopefully somebody else will buy it. So I just uploaded a tutorial on our YouTube channel. I'll leave a link down below, but it shows how to automatically cancel unpaid items. So this is something as a seller, you can go into your seller account and you can set it to automatically cancel after so many days. So you can go in and actually set that in your account to automatically do that. And that's one thing I do like, is because then Casey and I don't have to worry about that. All we have to do is send the invoice, send a friendly reminder, and then after the 4 days, if they don't end up paying, it automatically cancels it. And then we have it set up to where it will auto relist it. Because that's another thing. If you don't have that auto relist on and you have it set to automatically cancel, or you do cancel it, you have to go in and you have to relist that item. So by automating it, you don't have to worry about it. And it's just something that we don't even, it doesn't bother us because we have that automatically set up to relist it. And it's like, okay, we can't do anything about it. The buyer bought the item, they didn't pay. 4 days, the listing's going to cancel and then auto relist. So that's a really good feature to have. So if you're curious how to do it, it's pretty simple to set up. I'll leave the link below and then you guys can check that out. And I highly recommend setting that up in your account.
And the last tip is that if you feel that the buyer wasn't a good buyer, you can always add them to your blacklist. They will be able to message you for some reason. That's another feature eBay has implemented, that if you block someone, they can still send you messages, which is great. But if you block them, they won't be able to purchase anything from you. However, that does not stop them from creating an additional account or logging in as a guest and trying to purchase from you that way. So blocking only goes so far, but it is something that, you can try if you think that it might help a little bit.
I think sometimes also, which I didn't have in the notes, the unpaid items, sometimes I always wonder if it could be other sellers selling similar items you do. Maybe it's something that's very rare and there's only 5 listings and somebody wants to make sure that theirs gets sold. I've heard of that happening, sellers thinking it's another seller.
They're trying to get yours off the market so theirs has a better chance of selling. That happens all the time. Absolutely all the time.
And we have everything set up for best offer, unless it's something that we want to liquidate and we have it for $10. And I'm I'm not going any lower. If I can't sell it for $10, I'm taking it off the platform and I'm going to sell it at the garage sale. But everything with the offers set up, you can actually see now if you're going to get paid for the item right away or if it's going to be in 4 days, which I like to pay attention to. If we're going to take time off and somebody sends us an offer and it looks like they won't pay right away, we're going to have to change our handling time, or maybe we're going on vacation. I will actually decline that offer, because I know if I accept that offer and it says that they have 4 days to pay, I don't want to sell it and then have them pay and I'm on vacation and I can't ship that item out. So that it is something that you can see on mobile, especially. They actually will let you know if you're going to get paid right away or in 4 days. So that is very helpful for sellers. And, maybe you just decline and say, it looks like you don't have it set up for immediate payment or something like that. And, just explain to the buyer why you're declining it. But in the end, I think unpaid items, until eBay fixes this, it's something we're just going to have to deal with as sellers. But hopefully some of these tips will help you automate it so you don't have to really worry about it. Try sending the invoice, try reaching out to the buyer, and hopefully you will have less unpaid items.
All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the Paycheck to Daycheck Reselling Podcast.
Anything we mentioned in this episode will be linked down below in the show notes or description down below.
Be sure to share this episode with anyone you think it will help, and follow us on social media at P2D Podcast.
Thanks again for listening. Keep working towards that Daycheck.